Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Really fun show on tap for us. We're obviously getting ready for Georgia and Texas on Saturday. I've got one factor in that game for both sides. They're going to go a long way towards determining who wins this one on Saturday. That'll be a fun discussion. We'll have Davin Bellamy stopping by. That's always great on a Wednesday. Mike Griffith, too. That is coming up. And we're going to get into the college football playoff top 25, released again last night. And I think this ranking that came out last night, I think sends a pretty clear message to Georgia about what it should want the rest of the way this season and how Saturday's game against Texas can impact that. So we'll begin with that today. We'll also remind you about the big event right off the top that is just one day away for us. We are excited about tomorrow in DawgNation on tap. Can't wait for that. So let's tell you all about it and more. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think the College Football Playoff Selection Committee sent a pretty clear message to Georgia last night about what should Georgia want the rest of the season. We'll explain this to you here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let me remind you, we are just one day away from a gigantic event for DawgNation that every single one of you are invited to be a part of, absolutely free of charge. It is our DawgNation on tap going down tomorrow at Terrapin Brewery and Tap Room in Athens. This is going to be an amazing event. It's going to be from 6 to 9 p.m. The entire DawgNation team is going to be there. We're going to be hanging out. We'll do a live Q&A. We'll do some informal talk. Your first beer tomorrow night, courtesy of Terrapin, is going to be complimentary. That's amazing. You want some good food to eat? How about the folks from Sorcheros, the fresh Mex food in which they're famous for? They're going to be on hand serving you too. That's going to be incredible. If that's not enough, we also have a trio of special guests who are going to be with us. It's going to be so much fun. How about Davin Bellamy? He's going to join us later on today. He'll be with us tomorrow. Our guy John Stinchcomb going to be with us as well. And in addition to that, just announced yesterday, confirmed that Rodrigo Blankenship going to be there too. So Hot Rod, Davin, John Stinchcomb. What an incredible collection of special guests we have for you tomorrow night, Terrapin Brewery and Tap Room from 6 to 9 p.m. for DawgNation on tap. That's a totally free event. So all we're going to ask you to do is RSVP. Just simply let us know you're coming. It's tomorrow. Let us know you're going to be there. Go to DawgNation.com/on-tap and just say, hey, BA, I'm coming, and I'm bringing whoever. Think about this like your cousin's wedding. We just want to know you're coming. We want to have enough food for you. We want to make sure we have enough space for you. We cannot wait to see you there. DawgNation on tap comes up tomorrow. Going to be exciting. And in addition to that, we're obviously leading into the big one on Saturday, and tomorrow someone at the event is going to win a pair of tickets for Georgia and Texas coming up on Saturday. So we're going to give away a pair of tickets to the big game on Saturday. That's awesome. Also having a tremendous event with all of you tomorrow as well. DawgNation.com/on-tap. Free event, just RSVP. Davin, Rodrigo, John Stinchcomb, me, the entire DawgNation team, Terrapin Beer, Sorcheros Food. Someone's going to win tickets to the game. Man, what an awesome event. Terrapin Brewery and Tap Room tomorrow from 6 to 9 p.m. Cannot wait to have you there for that. Okay, let me shift to this. Do you remember when the college football playoff first came out? 2014 was the very first year. And in that time, when they would run the TV commercials advertising for the playoff, whether it be the rankings or just the games themselves, the tagline at the time was, "Are you in? Are you in?" That was the question. Back then, it was just a 14 playoff, and that was really the only relevant question. Getting in was enough. All four playoff teams were essentially treated the same way. It was just one of those things of 130 college football teams, but only 4 of them can call themselves college football playoff teams, and so therefore it was always a race to be in, and most teams didn't feel like they were in, and that's one of the reasons we got playoff expansion. Well, now the question, and this is relevant for Georgia in a year like this, the question is far more than just, are you in? to use a phrase you sometimes see online, there are levels to this now. It's not just about being in the playoff. It's some teams, the very top, they also get a bye in the playoff. They're one of the 12, but they're one of the precious 4 in that 12 that don't have to play in the first round of the college football playoff. And a year ago, that was reserved for the 4 highest-rated conference champions. This year, it can be anybody. More on that in a moment. The next group, below those who get the bye, these are the next 4, the 5, 6, 7, and 8 seed that get the precious home game. They have to play in the first round, which is theoretically a disadvantage, but they get a chance to play that game at home. That's the next group you want to be in. And believe it or not, even in that group, there's a little bit of a subgrouping that goes on because, as we'll talk more about in a moment, there's a very big difference between being like, say, the 5 seed, where you might be hosting the group of 5 team in a year like this. For instance, if Georgia holds at number 5, South Florida, if it were to hold as the group of 5 team that makes the college football playoff, the gambling expert Brad Powers currently makes Georgia a 17.5-point favorite over South Florida. Just for some context here, in addition to being a home team, it's even better to be the 5 seed because you're maybe playing the worst team that got into the college football playoff, where you would be a pretty big favorite. Then after that, there's the next group of, okay, well, you made the playoff, but you got to go on the road for the first round, and you've got to have a tough road if you want to advance in the college football playoff. You're in, but you've got the least advantageous path. So in a 12-team playoff, there's sub-hierarchies within the overall hierarchy that has to matter. And all of this is currently, I would say, very relevant for Georgia. Georgia last night was ranked 5th by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, which is the exact same ranking it had the previous week. So from that standpoint, as it relates to Georgia, there really isn't much news specifically related to Georgia. But there are signals about how other teams were treated that I think gives you an idea of what could eventually happen with Georgia. For instance, just below Georgia, as relayed by Mack Rhoades, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee chairman. By the way, it's been an interesting few days for him. But nonetheless, he is the committee chairman, at least for now. And in speaking last night, Georgia at 5, below that, we saw some movement. Previous week, Ole Miss was at number 6. Ole Miss blew up the Citadel on Saturday. Texas Tech, the big marquee game. Game day was there. A lot of folks watched Texas Tech beat BYU, and that was enough last night to move Texas Tech over Ole Miss. Rebels dropped to 7. Red Raiders move up to 6. It was apparently a quite strenuous deliberation on the part of the committee that ended up with that result, and it is relevant for Georgia for reasons I'll explain, so much so that I want you to hear right now. This is Committee Chairman Mack Rhoades explaining this committee's line of thought for why it is that Texas Tech leapt ahead of Ole Miss last night. Here is Mack Rhoades.
Probably the longest discussion that we had in the room was Texas Tech and Ole Miss. Texas Tech's win, just recently this past weekend against BYU, really convincing. Both sides of the ball. Texas Tech defensively, really, really good. Offensively, moved the ball up and down the field. Kicked some field goals, so probably left some points off the board. But really, looked at, Texas Tech's, 2 top 13 wins, BYU, Utah, Ole Miss, had the one win at really good win at Oklahoma, also a win against LSU. But Texas Tech, highly regarded by the committee.
So what Mack Rhoades does not say there is that Ole Miss has a better strength of record and a much better strength of schedule than Texas Tech has. Rhoades cites the ranked wins, the fact, they beat number 13 Utah. But you can listen to any number of neutral observers on this, non-SEC fans, non-Big 12 fans. One of the biggest questions being asked right now is, well, how come Utah's ranked number 13? And there are plenty of conspiratorial-minded people who are like, well, that may be part of the reason. If you rank them 13, then you can brag on Texas Tech and say, they beat the 13th ranked team, even though the ranking for Utah in the eyes of many is pretty inexplicable overall. But putting that aside, you have a situation in which we went into the playoff this year after an off-season worth of chatter on this, being told that this year they're going to take strength of schedule more seriously. This year, they're going to take who you played into stronger consideration than they did a year ago. Well, last week, given a chance to do that with Notre Dame in comparison to the likes of Texas and Oklahoma, they didn't do that. This week, given a chance to do that with Texas Tech and Ole Miss on the heels of a big win for Texas Tech, once again, strength of record and strength of schedule does not win out here. The strength of record of both these teams is pretty close. The strength of schedule favors Ole Miss, but that doesn't hold a lot of credibility in the eyes of the committee, because for the second consecutive year in this 12-team world, it just doesn't seem like strength of schedule matters all that much to these folks, or, if I'm being honest, maybe their ability to quantify that or consider that in the light of the conversation they're having, maybe they just don't quite have that capacity. I think you at least have to consider that as a possibility. And this isn't just a fluky thing that goes on, because when you also go and look at above Georgia in the rankings last night, Georgia holds steady at 5. Below Georgia, there's a little bit of drama. Texas Tech jumps Ole Miss. But above Georgia, Texas A&M goes on the road, beats previously ranked Missouri. Indiana goes on the road, survives late against the very disappointing Penn State team that's completely fallen apart and fired its coach. And yet that's not enough to move Texas A&M above Indiana in that category of unbeatens from, like, say, 3 to 2. That didn't happen last night. And once again, Mack Rhoades went into pretty explicit detail about why it is they just seem to like Indiana so much right now at the expense of the undefeated SEC team, Texas A&M. Here is Mack Rhoades again.
So, certainly discussion about those two games, but also discussion about body of work when we think about both of those teams. And so, we looked at, Indiana's win at Oregon, Indiana's win at Iowa, A&M's win, certainly at South Bend, their most recent win against Missouri. Indiana, obviously, their win against Penn State. Conversation about Missouri. Missouri, really good team, but probably not the team that they've been. Starting their third quarterback, a true freshman. That's a really, really tough spot for that young man. When you look at both of these teams, they're really close. They're really close defensively. Give Indiana the edge, and they're really close offensively, and certainly gave Indiana the slight edge there. Indiana finding a way to win. Fernando Mendoza, the second rated quarterback in passing efficiency. So those were all conversations. But again, that was the second longest discussion in the room. Two really, really good teams, really, really close.
So let me ask you two questions about what Mack Rhoades said there. And admittedly, I'm a pro-SEC guy. I'm going to make the SEC argument. If I don't, who will? So admittedly, that's what I'm doing here. I don't make any excuses for that. But let me ask you two questions here for a moment. And I think these are questions that deserve an answer. He says, well, Missouri's not the same team it was starting a true freshman quarterback. My legitimate question, not rhetorical, my legitimate question back on that is, well, how come y'all ranked them last week? I mean, we knew that Bo Pribula was injured going into last week's ranking, and you put Missouri in the rankings. All of a sudden now, because Texas A&M beat them convincingly, well, now we've determined, well, Missouri's just not the same team because they got a true freshman quarterback. But you had that knowledge available to you last week. You still ranked them. And I don't think the fact that A&M wins convincingly should completely negate what Missouri is. That still has a chance to be an 8-win team by the time the year is all said and done. That's a pretty good year for what is essentially, kind of a bottom, third, certainly below the 50th percentile of SEC teams. That's not necessarily a bad season. And here's the other thing. If Indiana and Texas A&M are so close, and boy, they're just right there, but Indiana's just slightly better, and this is a big question that college ball has to wrestle with. It really does. What's the point of playing Notre Dame? If Texas A&M goes on the road and beats Notre Dame, Indiana doesn't play anyone out of conference at all. Their strength of schedule, according to ESPN FPI, just 33rd. If going on the road and beating Notre Dame, who this committee loves, and A&M beat them, if that doesn't give you a nod over Indiana right now, then legitimately, what's the point of playing the game? And what hope does college football have that games like this will continue to be played? if you don't get credit for winning it. That matters. It matters for Georgia too. Georgia a year ago playing Clemson, or 2 years before that playing Oregon, or playing Georgia Tech every year. What's the point of playing these games if you don't get credit for winning them? And it seems like right now the SEC, which is the only league I think that has a winning record against other Power 4 non-conference opponents, they don't get credit for winning those games. I think you have to ask, well, then why do you keep playing them if winning them doesn't seem to matter? Now, once again, and this is where we'll bring it back to Georgia, the topic comes up of, okay, but A&M does have a better strength of schedule. It does have a better strength of record. How come that's not enough to move them ahead of, we're not going to consider Ohio State for a moment, just focusing on Indiana. How come that's not enough to move them ahead of Indiana? And in the same press conference from last night, Mack Rhoades took another stab at trying to answer that.
Again, when we look at, schedule strength and record strength, because you mentioned those two, again, just two of the metrics, those teams are very, very close. Extremely, extremely close. When we look at those two, again, defensively, Indiana, we give them the edge over A&M. We give Indiana certainly the edge. Offensively, they're the top scoring offense in the country. Their defense is ranked second. And so, again, those are two teams, as I mentioned, the longest discussion, Texas Tech, Ole Miss. The second longest discussion was Indiana and Texas A&M.
So let me just make one small point here, and then I want to focus on something different. When he says they're very close in one metric, but not quite so close in another. The metric they're close in is strength of record. Texas A&M's got the strongest strength of record. They're ranked number 1, and I'm getting all this from ESPN and FPI. According to FPI, they're number 1 strength of record. Indiana's number 2. But where they're not particularly close is in strength of schedule. A&M has the 15th strength of schedule. Indiana's just 33rd. Now, there's not always a lot of difference between teams that are a couple of spots away from each other, but in this particular case, A&M's almost in like the top 10 percentile of strength of schedule, and Indiana's outside the top 20. So, that is, to me, a fairly sizable difference in strength of schedule between Indiana and A&M. And let me get deep in the weeds for 1 second. Here's the thing about strength of record, and the math nerds can explain this better than I can. Strength of record is always going to be biased in favor of undefeated teams. Everybody who's undefeated has a high strength of record. But once you lose, if you've only got the 33rd strength of schedule, your strength of record is going to plummet. And the math people can explain that better than me, but you can observe this every year, is that the difference between a one-loss team and an undefeated team from a strength of record standpoint is pretty sizable, because it's a lot easier to lose only once than it is to lose 0 games, no matter what your schedule looks like overall. But here is where this comes back and becomes relevant for Georgia, and here's why the Georgia game against Texas on Saturday is far more high stakes than I think that some realize. When you look at how these SEC teams are being treated, Ole Miss compared to Texas Tech. And by the way, you had Greg McElroy on TV last night arguing that Texas Tech should have been ahead of Georgia anyway. But when you look at how Ole Miss got treated comparison to Texas Tech, how Texas A&M is treated compared to Indiana, how Texas and Oklahoma and even Vanderbilt are being compared right now and treated right now in comparison to Notre Dame. The SEC teams up and down these rankings really aren't getting credit for strength of schedule. And they're really not getting treated the way in which a league that's as deep as the SEC probably should be treated. So I think if you're Georgia, I think you have a clear path forward if your goal is to win the national championship. Of course, you want to beat Texas on Saturday, but the stakes are even higher than that. We've said that we believe that Georgia can clinch a playoff spot for all intents and purposes by winning against Texas. But beyond that, if you're Georgia, I think you also then want Texas to go beat Texas A&M, or whatever confluence of events have to occur with an Alabama loss. In other words, there's a debate among Georgia fans of, well, do you want to clinch the playoff and then just sit back and rest and host a home playoff game in the first round? Or do you want to get the right series of events to occur that give you a chance to play for the SEC championship? I think you want to play for the SEC championship. I think, to put it in the simplest terms possible, you want to keep moving up the hierarchy of the SEC to take this out of the hands of the committee. Because let me explain to you why I think it matters where Indiana's ranked and where Texas A&M is ranked, is because in a year in which there are 4 byes up for grabs, don't overthink this. You want the bye if you can get it. You want a shorter path through the playoff if you can have it. The number 3 team is in a tough spot if it were to lose its conference title game because the committee's showing some respect for Texas Tech. If it wins the Big 12, it has a chance to move up even more. So, in other words, if Texas Tech gets one of those byes, that means that either the SEC or the Big 10 won't be able to get 2. One of the 2 leagues will get 2. One of the 2 leagues won't get 2 if Texas Tech keeps moving up. You want to be in the SEC championship game to put yourself in a position to get at least one of those byes, if not the SEC's only bye, by being SEC champion, if that's what you can do. That is still the goal for Georgia. Even though you don't have to win the SEC to win the national championship, the path towards winning the national championship is still clearer and easier if you do get the right series of events to take place so that you can play for the SEC championship. Georgia needs some help, but it should want that help. And to play one more clip from Mack Rhoades here, he essentially acknowledged that it's better to be in your conference's title game than not, which I think gives you a pretty clear indication of what Georgia should be rooting for. This is Mack Rhoades last night.
Yeah, for the committee, we look at it as a positive. If you're playing in the championship game, it's another data point. It's certainly recognized when we think about record strength. Obviously, you win it. That's a plus. If you lose it, theoretically, it's not supposed to hurt you. Could it hurt you? If it was a game where it wasn't competitive and you completely got blown away, then that would be a conversation, candidly, in the room amongst the committee.
So don't get blown out, I guess, but it's still, as he says, and he even says more explicitly than has ever been implied before, that, yeah, you're not supposed to be hurt by playing in your conference championship game. He essentially says that, which is why Georgia wants to be there, because being there gives you a chance to, hey, if you don't have a bye, maybe you're the 5 seed. Maybe you're playing South Florida as opposed to the ACC champion, which is a slightly easier game. Or maybe you can get one of the coveted byes. You don't have to play the first round at all. So last night, to sum all this up, Georgia's ranking doesn't change, but the action around Georgia gives you a pretty strong indication of where this is going. The SEC is not currently getting credit for its strength of schedule. Not at the top of the rankings, not below Georgia, not really anywhere in this top 25 is SEC schedule strength being given its due deference. That means you don't want to leave this in the hand of the committee. You want to keep winning, and if you can, all the way through the SEC championship. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Looking forward to tomorrow, DawgNation on tap. Can't wait to see you at Terrapin Brewery and Tap Room in Athens for that big event, and happy to have you with us here today. More on how Georgia gets it done against Texas coming up in just a moment. But first, let me thank Breda Pest Management, who make it all possible. Bugs and critters, we hate them. This time of year when it's been cold, a lot of these critters want to come inside your house to get away from the cold weather, and you don't want that. Let me just tell you, that's what Breda and their wildlife management experts are working to keep from happening. They'll get your home, critter-free if that's what needs to happen. They'll obviously keep the bugs away too. Termite protection in Georgia, it's just a fact of life. You have to have that. If you want to protect your home, and of course you do, it's your number one financial investment. It's the source of all your emotional strength. You draw that from your home. Well, it means you got to take good care of it. You got to protect it. Those wood-destroying organisms can just wreak havoc. Well, don't let that happen. Breda can provide the termite protection, then keep your home bug and critter free, and they can do that for you at a much better price than whoever you're currently working with. Let's face it, year after year, the letter comes in the mail, the cost of service is going up, even though to your eyes, it seems like the quality of service is going down. With Breda Pest Management, that's not going to be the situation. They're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch. That's what Breda Pest Management is all about. And I can tell you this firsthand because Breda takes care of me. They're keeping my home bug and critter free. They're keeping the termites away. I love that when it comes to our friends at Breda Pest Management. So find them online, BredaPest.com, B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com for more on that. B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com for more on that. All right, fun show for us coming up. It's Davin Bellamy later on. I can't wait to talk more to him about what we've seen from Georgia as of late and what that might mean for this game against Texas. We're looking forward to that. It's Mike Griffith here in a minute, too. We'll get more into the top 25 rankings with Mike a little bit and the stakes for Georgia. A lot of Georgia fans were like, hey, you know what? If I'm in the playoff, if I'm hosting a home game, I think that's probably enough. Man, I wouldn't trust the committee with any of that right now. I really, really wouldn't. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And let's talk for a moment about what it's going to take to get it done for Georgia against Texas. And I think it comes down to obviously several things, but there's one thing in particular I want to focus on here right now. That's the role that Gunnar Stockton plays in the game, especially with his legs. It just seems like in the best performances for Georgia offensively this season, the dimension of what Gunnar can provide with his legs just seems like that's been a big part of the Georgia attack thus far this year. And with that in mind, and also knowing that Arch Manning's got at least a little bit of mobility to his game too, I thought that Kirby Smart said something interesting on Monday about why it is that quarterbacks that can run have become so valuable in college football right now. Smart, I think, explained it pretty well. This is what Kirby said.
I just think defenses are hard to run on without the extra element. I don't know that they've taken more chances. Offenses can become more predictable when they're not using their quarterback's legs. But I don't know that there's a team we've played this year that hasn't used their quarterback's leg like everybody does. You say, well, that quarterback can't run. They still use them. They still get him out of the pocket and use him to run the ball. So that advent has come about because rushing the ball matters. I don't think that advent has come along because defenses have evolved to the point they stop people from doing it. It's just we have to be able to get some situational runs, red area, third down, goal line, whatever you call it. You need creative ways to run the ball to stay ahead.
So let me give you a couple of stats that back up what Kirby's saying there. First of all, just looking at Georgia and just looking at this season, the one game that Georgia lost this year against Alabama, Gunnar Stockton only had 5 yards rushing, no rushing touchdowns. By comparison, against Tennessee, a very good day for the Georgia offense, Gunnar had 38 yards rushing and a touchdown. It doesn't have to be an eye-popping stat line, but the running game was a factor. That was enough to help Georgia win the game. Against Kentucky, overmatched opponent, but it was a blowout win. Gunnar ran for 48 yards that day and 2 touchdowns. Good offensive performance. Against Auburn, only ran for 26 yards, but one of those was a touchdown, the famous Superman there at the end of the game that Kirby Smart didn't want him to get, but the threat of Gunnar's legs does help Georgia win that game. Best example of this may be against Ole Miss, where he had a rushing touchdown too, but he also had 59 yards rushing overall. When Georgia's been its best offensively, there has been something from Gunnar Stockton in the running game to go along with that. Maybe more pronounced, though, when you look at what Georgia has faced defensively. Go back to last year, 3 losses for Georgia. Quarterback run was a pretty big factor in all 3 of those losses. Jalen Milroe had 117 yards rushing against Georgia in 2024. Jackson Dart had 50 yards rushing in that loss against Ole Miss last November. Riley Leonard, the Notre Dame quarterback, a run-first quarterback, had 80 yards rushing against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl back in January. The 3 losses for Georgia last season, running quarterback, factored pretty heavily into all 3 of those. And the only loss for Georgia so far this year, Ty Simpson only had 12 yards rushing, but he did have a rushing touchdown, and that's about all he ever runs in any game anyway. So Georgia gives up the rushing touchdown to Simpson, lose the game this year. Gave up big totals to 3 quarterbacks a year ago, lost all 3 games. Even some of the near, losses, almost upsets, like Auburn, Georgia Tech, running quarterback was a big deal in those games too. And when Georgia's at its best, quarterback running is a big part of the offensive formula. Against Alabama, it essentially was not there. We think that's especially important for this Saturday against Texas, because when you look at what Texas does well, Kirby says, hey, if you don't have some quarterback run, it's hard to run the ball as effectively as you want to. Well, if that's true in college football overall, it's especially true against Texas, because this is and has been a good defensive front, and Kirby Smart talked about the challenge that presents for his rushing attack earlier this week too.
Yeah, they were really effective in that area last year. They're built on the line of scrimmage. They're built to be physical. They fit things really well. Pete does a great job as a defensive coordinator. They're very disruptive. They create turnovers, aggressive. They got good players. I mean, at the end of the day, they got big, physical, good players on the line of scrimmage, which allows you to stop the run.
Now, the flip side of this is while Georgia can try to get something going for Gunnar Stockton, obviously Texas has the chance to do that with Arch Manning as well. And it's almost like if you want to make this to a really simplistic point, you almost feel like this game could be decided between which of the two quarterbacks gets more rushing yards. If it's Gunnar, that's probably enough to put Georgia over the top. If it's Arch, that might be enough to put Texas over the top. That's how significant quarterback run could be in this game. And Kirby was also willing to go into detail on, okay, when it comes to Arch Manning, you've got to get some pass rush. That's been an issue for Georgia all year long. It was better against Mississippi State. But you've got to do that without creating opportunities for them to him find open lanes to run in, use his legs to the Longhorns' advantage. So Gunnar wants to get something on the ground. Georgia's also trying to stop Arch Manning from doing the same, and Kirby talked about that too.
Yeah, it's a challenge every play. There's 6 gaps, sometimes 7 gaps up there you got to fill, and you can't fill them all. So you got to rush intelligently and violently, and those two don't always mix. So it's hard to do that and contain the quarterback. We've had some opportunities to get sacks that we've capitalized on. We had a couple chances on normal down stuff the last week with Mississippi State's style of play, but it'll be key this week for sure because Arch is really good. They're really good at protection. They know what they're doing. They've got different protections, and that's a challenge every week for our defense to try to affect the quarterback.
I think it's key for both teams. Georgia wants to get its stuff on the ground with Gunnar Stockton, aiding the rushing attack for Georgia that's been really prolific as of late, and Texas would obviously like to do the same thing. It'll be the Georgia defense's job to stop that. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, we told you before, we love the agricultural community right here in the great state of Georgia. We're proud of it, and we love the fact that Georgia Farm Bureau does such a great job supporting it, which is why we want to support them. So for things you have to have, like auto insurance, home insurance, legally you're basically bound to do this. You have to have it, especially in the case of auto insurance. We would say, why not trust Georgia Farm Bureau for that? They're always the home team. Their agents are in Georgia just like you, in communities just like yours. They're raising their family. They're going to work. They're really living life much the same way you are. And their professional career is dedicated to serving people when it comes to insurance stuff. Like, insurance is one of those complicated things. You hope you never really have to ask a bunch of questions about it. You don't need to know a lot about it. But when it's time to learn something about it because you have need for a claim, well, of course, you want friendly folks on the other end of that phone call to help you. And that is what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about. So please give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or find them online, gfbinsurance.com. Find out today why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, before we're done, it's Davin Bellamy. Davin will obviously be with us tomorrow at DawgNation on Tap. We'll talk some Georgia football with him. But for now, Georgia against Texas, the stakes for the game, the college football playoff rankings from last night. Let's cover all of that and more. Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Mike, before you joined us, we were just talking about QB run, and this is one of those things that a little bit sometimes goes a long way. You don't have to be Lamar Jackson. You don't have to be Michael Vick. You don't have to be, whoever. But, boy, just supplementing it a little bit seems to make a big difference. You look at the rushing totals for Gunnar this year and the best offensive performances for Georgia, there has been something from Stockton on the ground. Not necessarily 100 yards, but just something. The game against Alabama, there was almost nothing. That was obviously a tough day for Georgia overall. Similar thing could be said for Arch Manning in the games that Georgia lost last year. Certainly big rushing totals from quarterbacks. That mattered there. I think QB run, who gets it, who doesn't, I think that's probably a pretty big deal for both these teams on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're talking about avoiding sacks, right, and negative yardage. One of the things that I did when I did an Arch Gunnar comparison statistically was I looked at the 3 common opponents that they've played, and 2 of those 3 games, Arch Manning had negative yardage, and Gunnar only had negative yardage in 1 of those games. In other words, all of his rushing yards are forward, right? You look at the net. A lot of times when you look at quarterback rushing yardage, they take what they've gained and then they subtract the sack yardage. Well, that sack yardage is big because obviously it puts you in really bad down and distance situations and really affects your third down conversion percentage. Georgia has a much better third down conversion percentage than Texas, and a lot of that has to do with Gunnar Stockton not having negative plays. So even when he pulls it down and just gets back to the line of scrimmage or gets 2 or 3, that's huge because it sort of keeps him on schedule versus losing 8, 10, 12, where now you're in trouble. Now the chances of that catastrophic play, that forced pass when the other team knows you're throwing it, or another sack, or perhaps a strip sack fumble, those chances go up greatly. So a lot of what Gunner's done with his mobility is keep Georgia on schedule and avoid those sacks. I believe he's only been sacked 10 times, whereas I think Manning's been sacked 18.
I think it's a really good point. And it's one of those things that in football, it's hard to quantify what doesn't happen. You can always talk about what did happen, but it's hard to measure and pay attention to what doesn't happen. And there are a lot of sacks that Georgia could have gotten that they didn't get. I'll give you a perfect example. There was a moment against Florida, and I forget exactly when it happened during the game, but Stockton's eluding pass rush, and he eventually goes out of bounds. And there were some Florida media people sitting near me, and I just overheard them say, well, gosh, why'd Gunner do that? But then you look and you realize he gained 2 yards. It's one of those things of he's eluding pass rush, eluding pass rush, eluding pass rush, and finally he just goes out of bounds. And it seems like one of those things of, well, is he not aware of where the boundary line was? No, he eluded the what would have been a sack. He got 2 yards out of it, and now Georgia lives on to fight with a better down and distance than it would have had before. Maybe nobody was open, but he turned literally less than nothing, what would have been a negative play, into a slight positive. And I'm sorry, you go look at the Mississippi State game. Georgia was living in 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 1, all these 3rd and shorts. It's little stuff like that that sets up 3rd down to be a more manageable down and distance for you.
Well, yeah, because now look at how much of the playbook you can use. When it's 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 12 or 3rd and 9, there's only a few plays in there that really work. But like you say, you're dealing with 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. Well, there's a lot that you can call and a lot that the defense has to prepare for. And that leads to that run pass conflict, BA. And I don't know if you remember when Todd Monken was explaining to us how you get explosive plays. Yeah, you got to have great players and you got to call great plays, but you put the defense in run pass conflict where they don't know if it's a pass or a run. And that has to do with the down and distance. And you mentioned Gunner's decision against Florida. To me, this is the hidden area of growth. I mean, okay, he's throwing it a little bit more accurately. The timing is a little bit more accurate, but it's the same arm strength. It's the same foot speed, but it's better, quicker decision making. And the way he's managing these games is putting Georgia in a much better position. I dare say it's a much different Gunner Stockton now than when we saw him play against Alabama from a decision making standpoint.
It's also a better defense on paper than Georgia's seen in a little while. How much of a concern is that for you that, hey, from a defensive standpoint, it's a step up in competition that Georgia's going to be facing, certainly up front, a more stout defense, and it's probably played since the Auburn game. I think that Auburn defense is pretty good. This is probably a better defense that Georgia's seen since at least that time, if not going all the way back to Alabama.
Yeah, maybe. Florida's defense I'd put right there with Texas's when you look at the numbers. But and that was a tough game, by the way. Let's remember Florida was a very difficult game, and will there be many of the same challenges because the Texas defensive front is on par with Florida's, and it's going to challenge Georgia to do things differently. We know how effective Georgia is when they run the ball. I mean, look, Kirby Smart told us all the way back in the spring, this team has to run the ball. This has to be the identity for Gunner to be successful. He needs a running game that he can count on and rely on. He's not a drop back guy that's just going to pick him out and wing it. That's not the Georgia offense. He's made some great throws in the clutch, but you're not going to make a living with Gunner throwing it 40 or 45 times a game. You're just not. You're going to have balance. So how are they going to do that? Well, this is where Gunner's mobility comes into play. Maybe some called quarterback runs, not just those valuable scrambles. Maybe more of the screen game, which I know people are tired of, but it's an extended run. It's a high percentage pass that puts the ball in the hands of a playmaker on the perimeter where maybe you get away from those upfront matchups, the Texas front seven, the Georgia offensive line, if you're concerned about that. Now you're isolating a guy like Branch on a corner or a safety or perhaps an outside linebacker, and you like that matchup better. So what's going to happen is Mike Bobo and the staff is going to go to work. They're going to look to see where they feel like they have the best matchups, and they're going to build a play calling package based on those matchups. Yes, given the opportunity, Georgia would love to run off tackle and run power and on first down and gain 4 or 5 yard chunks. But against teams like Florida and Texas that have very good defensive fronts, you need to be a bit more unpredictable, throw a little bit more often on first down, and largely high percentage passes like the screens and maybe a little bit of those slant action that we've seen from Branch on occasion.
Let me do one more thing on the Georgia-Texas game. Then I want to ask you about the rankings from last night. When it comes to this Georgia defense, I'm convinced they're getting better. Now, I don't know how much better, and I don't know if they're going to be good enough to be a championship level unit, whatever that is, in 2025. I don't quite know where the level of improvement is going. I think they're getting better, though. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, and this is a Kirby trait, and it's not something to take for granted. Georgia, for the most part, now last year was an exception, Brandon, because I believe of the schedule. That schedule was just, it was absolutely brutal. It led to a lot of injuries, and as Kirby said, it really wore down the mental bandwidth. This year's team has managed the schedule better. I think that younger, youthful energy that Kirby talked about, I think that's played a positive role. A lot of the guys that are being coached up are young players. It feels like there's more quality depth with young talent that's getting better right before our eyes. But by and large, Kirby Smart's teams get better as the season progresses. That's not the case in all programs. It takes obviously a very good coaching staff. It takes talent, but it also takes the right locker room and that closeness that Georgia has. And that's another intangible. And I know people say, oh, that's just coach speak. It's really not. When you've got a strong line, and I'll be interested to hear Davin Bellamy talk about this, but when you have a strong locker room and a strong culture, that fosters positive practices when a lot of these other teams are dragging and man, this is getting old and I'm beat up and I'm tired and this is hard. These guys pull one another through it because of the standard, because of guys like CJ Allen that Kirby talks about that works so hard and challenges everybody, because of Zachariah Branch who works his guts out, because you've got a quarterback taking those hits with that lunch pail mentality, keeps everybody's spirits lifted. And so this is one of the secrets or one of the keys for Georgia's success, I believe, is the attitude in the program. And I believe that's why Georgia continues to get better, in addition to the fact they've recruited some good young guys, and now it's the second half of the season, and they're not freshmen anymore.
So let me finish with this. Looking at the playoff rankings from last night, it's noticeable to me that at 3 different spots in these rankings, the SEC is just not getting credit for its strength of schedule. A&M in comparison to Indiana is one of those. Ole Miss in comparison to Texas Tech is one of those. Texas and Oklahoma, and really even Vanderbilt in comparison to Notre Dame is one of those. You've got 3 different instances in 3 different spots in these rankings where, given the chance to show respect for strength of schedule, show respect for strength of record, the committee just chooses not to do it. And it's not that I don't think that Notre Dame, Texas Tech, and Indiana are good football teams. I mean, obviously, I think I've seen enough to say that all 3 of those teams are probably pretty good football teams, but we were told that strength of schedule was going to matter. I don't see any evidence of that being the case. Right now, on the basis of last night's ranking, I think it's more likely than not that the SEC doesn't get 2 byes. I think the Big Ten is probably in a better position currently to get that. I think all of this relates to Georgia. I said a moment ago that for Georgia fans who just want to make the playoff and host a home playoff game and let A&M and Alabama go duke it out in the SEC championship, I don't think you have that luxury. I don't think you want to trust the committee to treat you the way that you deserve to be treated in that situation. I think you want to keep on winning. I think you want to keep obviously you want to do that, but I think you want the confluence of events to take place that put you back in Atlanta and take this out of the committee's hand if you have a chance to do it, because this committee, for the most part, is operating right now just the same as they did a year ago.
Well, Brandon, it reminds me that back in the days of the NCAA investigations and penalties. You know, you'd see different programs get investigated for things and there'd be findings, and then we'd wait and find out what their punishment would be. And it wouldn't always be equal. And we'd go, well, now, wait a minute. How come this program got this and this program? Well, it had to do with what the members of the committee voted. And what were the members of the committee? they were made up of their peers around college football. And if you drew a bad card and it was somebody, from another school that didn't like you, as happened to Alabama in 1990 with Dr. David Swank at Oklahoma, you were in trouble. There was a lawsuit that came out of that. Well, this has the same feel. And I don't often like to read quotes on your program, but I will, because Eli Drinkwitz said something that goes very much hand in hand with what you're saying and what I wrote on AJC.com. When I asked Drinkwitz about the comfort level he had with this committee, because they do have former coaches on there, Mark D'Antonio, who coached at Michigan State, Mike Riley, who coached at Nebraska and Oregon State, and Chris Ault, who coached at Nevada, I said, do you feel comfort with that? He said, not really. He said every coach has a different taste in what they're looking for on film. Some are defensive coaches. They're going to evaluate defensive strengths. Some are offensive coaches. They'll evaluate offensive strengths. This is where it gets interesting. Some people don't like other people. Some people rank their conference better than others. Some people think that because they played in this conference, it's going to be different. That is a current active SEC coach telling you that this committee is biased. And you've pointed it out, and I've pointed it out. The schedule metrics are right there in front of us. The records are the same. One team has played a better strength of schedule than the other. We were told in the offseason, and in fact, the SEC made the decision to go to a ninth conference game with the confidence that this new schedule metric, they've added a schedule strength metric, and they've tweaked the strength of schedule to make more important games more valuable. Even with more emphasis on schedule strength, a concerted effort, it's still not happening. This is a big problem because we were told this was going to be addressed. And it's not you and I saying, it's not the fans saying it or the analysts, it's the coaches that feel this. And when the coaches are saying things like this, some people don't like some people, that tells you everything you need to know. I don't have the answer. Talking to Gary Stokan about it, he said, look, there's a lot of football left to be played. SEC teams are playing one another. Here's my problem. I was on the teleconference last night, and when they brought up the Indiana-Texas A&M argument, the committee chairman, Mack Rhoades, Baylor athletic director, said, well, in the case of Indiana, we looked at the body of work, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, when we compared Miami and Notre Dame, Miami beat Notre Dame head-to-head. Where was the body of work there? Why aren't we looking at what? Okay, another instance. Someone said, well, what about Missouri? What about Texas A&M beating Missouri? Well, Missouri has a third quarterback, a freshman, and that's a tough situation. And then, another team was asked, Vanderbilt was asked about. Yeah. Well, they played an Auburn team with an interim head coach. Well, they did. Okay, well, what about Indiana? Doesn't Penn State have an interim coach? Haven't they lost 6 games in a row? Aren't they winless in the Big Ten next to last? Why aren't we qualifying Indiana's win and picking at that like we're picking at Texas A&M? So there's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of inconsistency. The more they explain it, the worse they sound, because there's no consistency in the method. Now, they will tell you, well, this is a good thing because people can now argue and debate it. Look, that'd be like me saying, it'd be like a police officer pulling you over and you say, oh, wait a minute, the other guy was going 75, I was going 67. He goes, yeah, isn't it great? You can debate which car I should have pulled over. Yeah, that was more flagrant, but you know what? I decided today to pull over a red car instead of a green car because I have a green car. It's just throw the whole thing out. It's garbage. Paul Feinbaum said it yesterday. It's the same old circus.
Seems to be. Mike, appreciate your time. We'll see you tomorrow night. Dawg Nation on tap. Looking forward to that. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management here today.
Looking forward to Devin. Thanks, B. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you too. Thanks a lot.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, as Mike said, Davin Bellamy coming up in a moment. Davin will also be with us at Dawg Nation on tap tomorrow at the Terrapin Brewery and Tap Room. We'll hope you'll join us for that, too. Before we do our SEC Through, let me also give a shout-out to our friends at Jittery Joe's Coffee. This is a great time of year to be thinking about Jittery Joe's because they always have a lot of fun Christmas and holiday themed type stuff for you. You got a lot of folks to buy for. Never easy in some cases. Well, everybody loves the Georgia themed stuff, and that's what Jittery Joe's has a lot of here right now. You can get Attack the Day coffee now in K-Cups. That's only from Jittery Joe's. You can also get the delicious coffee that's been voted Athens Best 15 years in a row. Been locally owned right there in Athens for 30 years. This is one of those things that, Georgia fans obviously have loved Jittery Joe's coffee for a long time. There's a location all across Athens that people are enjoying. Really great chance to be able to do that. And if you want to bring the great taste of Jittery Joe's coffee to other folks, maybe it's time for you to think about this as a business opportunity too, because they're launching a franchise company using their 3 decades of experience to really give you a turnkey opportunity to get a beloved business. People love Jittery Joe's coffee, and you can open up a Jittery Joe's coffee franchise and have a great business opportunity. It stands out from the rest of the folks in the field, but just because of the history and tradition that Jittery Joe's has in the local market. So it's an awesome thing. Check out jitteryjoes.com for more about these franchising opportunities. And if you just want to enjoy the great taste of Jittery Joe's, you can get half off your first beverage when you download the Jittery Joe's app. So make sure you check that out today. Okay, let's do a couple of things here SEC through-wise before we bring on Davin Bellamy. And, speaking of the whole thing about strength of schedule, here's something to understand, is that the committee, for the most part, just does whatever it wants to. Sometimes it cares about strength of schedule, sometimes it doesn't. We just gave you an instance before of at least 5 SEC teams not getting credit for strength of schedule. But last night, Mack Rhoades, when asked about how come South Florida is ranked ahead of, say, James Madison, the first thing he went to was strength of schedule. So strength of schedule is the first thing they grab for when it justifies their priors, and they pretend that it doesn't exist when that's what they want to do. There is one thing, though, and one of these days we'll get more into this. I am becoming more and more convinced that there is one thing the committee really cares about that they almost never talk about anymore, but it is still a guiding light for their overall decision-making. Have you heard the phrase game control before? The committee doesn't talk out loud very much about game control. How dominant you are for the full 60 minutes. By the way, something that Georgia does not necessarily rank very high on. I think Georgia's probably 13th, 14th in America in the overall game control stat. But the committee still really likes it. Indiana, for instance, they're second in game control, according to ESPN and FBI. Texas Tech, third in game control. And let me be fair for a moment. That's not necessarily an invalid way to look at football. Hey, you control the game, you must be pretty good. Not necessarily an invalid way to look at football. Here's what I would suggest, though. Once again, this comes from the pro-SEC standpoint. There are certain SEC teams that don't fare as well from a game control standpoint. A&M's just 4th. Alabama's just 6th. Ole Miss is just 7th. I mentioned before, Georgia's just 14th. Georgia's game control is worse than Tennessee's. Tennessee's is 12th. So the SEC doesn't exactly lead the world in game control right now. But here's a question worth asking. Which games do people like watching more? Do they like watching Indiana games, or do they like watching SEC games? I'm serious about this. That the SEC plays tougher schedules, games that are more difficult to control, they go down to the wire, and a team like Georgia finds a way to pull it out at the end. That's not very game control-y, but isn't it more entertaining? The TV rating seems to suggest that. 9 of the 10 most viewed teams in college football this year have been from the SEC. So game control, the idea thereof, is not necessarily a bad way to view football. But I would argue about whether or not it's the best way to view football, especially if you don't say out loud that's really the way that you're doing this. Let me give you 2 more things from the rankings last night, then we'll get ready to bring on Davin Bellamy. I thought it was interesting that Iowa, ranked 20th last week, dropped just to 21st this week after losing close to Oregon. This, whatever, fine, it's the bottom of the rankings. I'm sure plenty of people don't care. But it's another example of the committee is just going to do whatever it wants and just make it up. So all of a sudden now a close loss against a good team only drops you 1 spot. Boy, wouldn't that have been nice back in 2023 when Georgia was ranked number 1 going into the conference title game after having won basically 30 games in a row, lost by 3 points to Alabama, and Georgia dropped 6 spots or 5 spots, whatever it was. It would have been nice to have some consistency and thought on that from year to year. I think it's also interesting that the committee has now just decided to have a complete do-over on Miami. 18th a week ago, really well below several ACC teams, including Louisville, that beat it. All of a sudden now, after both Virginia and Louisville lose, now Miami goes rocketing up the rankings. They're now ranked ahead of Georgia Tech, who didn't even play last week. Boy, that's hard to justify. But nonetheless, committee's going to do what the committee's going to do, and we'll make that your SEC through here today. And here on DawgNation Daily, always great to get a chance to talk to the great Davin Bellamy. And as I bring on Davin Bellamy to today's show, I got to start with this. Davin, we are thrilled to have you at DawgNation on tap tomorrow. And I know you've gotten some great feedback too, but people have loved your appearances here on our show over the course of the season. People have loved everything you had to say. And a lot of folks have been asking, when are you guys going to do a live event with Davin Bellamy? And we said, well, how about DawgNation on tap there in Athens at the Terrapin Brewery and Tap Room? First of all, thanks for being there. Thanks for hanging out with Georgia fans. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Yes, sir, man. I'm asking, I'm asking Jay Blackman to get me more, reps with you guys for so long, man.
We love it.
So finally I get to, join you guys through the week.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Can't wait to see you there tomorrow night. That's going to be a ton of fun. And it's going to be a fun conversation, too, because as you've been chronicling, and I think you've done a great job with this with your social media stuff, somehow, some way, it seems like Georgia's getting a little bit better on defense. And I told Mike Griffith a moment ago, I can't quite tell how much better, nor do I know for a fact where it's going, but it is improved. And the game against Mississippi State, that's a team that's moved the football on some folks. Right. They play fast. They got some weapons. And yet Georgia withstood the early touchdown and played almost a full 60 minutes after that. Tell me how much you think Georgia's improving on defense.
Man, I think they've improved so much, man. They were a young team, coming to this season. And, like I, always say, Georgia has conditioned, and Coach Smart has, conditioned the fans, because through all the first round draft picks, we've had that just because 1 or 2 first rounders walk out of the door, you have 2 already loading and ready. It takes time to be a first round, pass rusher. I mean, it takes time to be a first 3-round guy, because when you're a first 3-round guy, you're asking to come play right now. So with such young guys, there were going to be growing pains. And I remember when we started the season off playing some of the, lesser teams, and the question was, do Georgia want to try to do a shutout, or do we try to get young players in? And Coach Smart will always forfeit the shutout to get young guys in, to get young reps. But that's because reps make you better. In this defense, they started slow. And remember, about 3 weeks ago, I said starting slow, could be, 2 things. One of those things it could be is nervous, first time playing in this spot. You don't have a veteran team, so you kind of just got to get your nerves, settled. But this team played such good defense in the second half that it gave people like me, and I'm pretty sure the coaching staff, hope that if we just could combine 2 halves, then we can get a performance like we got versus, Mississippi State. One of the things I saw, improve was we had 3 sacks, in 3 quarters, and we knocked QB1 out of the game. When you knock QB1 out of the game because of hits and just being disruptive, that is a sign of a good D-line. So I definitely see the improvement, and I love how they put it together last week.
And you mentioned the defensive line. This is without Jordan Hall, who obviously suffered an injury in the Florida game. And to me, being an outsider, looking in on the program, it seemed like he was the heart and soul of that unit. He's a great spokesman for the team, and it's obviously not easy to play without him. But boy, last week it seemed like they held up okay without Jordan Hall in the game.
Yeah, man, you're getting new guys. This team has depth. And what I talked about on this show was 3-4 weeks ago was, if a player continues, I'm not going to say not do the call right, but if there's a younger player that's better or, close, it's time to start seeing those guys, get some reps. Number 81, he showed up
Yeah.
at the end of the game versus Ole Miss. And then you saw him, last week. So Jordan Hall is great from that leadership uh, standpoint, but you're starting to see, even in the DB room, when we're starting to play newer guys, because the defense just wasn't playing, to the standard, then this defense started looking a little better. So we wish Jordan Hall a speedy recovery because we need his leadership. But in all, man, it's next man up. And those new guys that have been playing these last 2 weeks, starting from the second half of that, Ole Miss game, they've been playing lights out.
Well, another guy that's not quite so new, but boy, it seems like he's coming on at the right time. Raylan Wilson, the linebacker, wears number 5, 2 first quarter sacks last week. This is a guy that was probably a little easy for some to overlook before the season began. That's no fault of Wilson's. It's just that a lot of other guys were maybe getting more attention. But to my eyes, it seems like Raylan's becoming one of Georgia's most important players. Georgia's always so strong at the linebacker position, and C.J. Allen's having the kind of year where maybe he wins the Buckus Award again, another Georgia player to do so. That would obviously be amazing. But my gosh, man, Raylan Wilson has certainly turned himself into what, to me, looks like a really good football player, and I'm happy to see him getting the credit he deserves now.
Yeah, man, with the inside linebackers, they've added more to their plate. The first 4 to 6 weeks, it was let's play standard, football. Let's see which pass rusher is going to, emerge and be that guy. And for the first 6 weeks, we struggled just getting touches, on the QB from the front seven. So these last 2 to 3 weeks, I think Glenn Schumann and Coach Smart are doing a great job of, okay, if we've tried it this way, now let's add more to number 5 and CJ Allen's plate. And you've seen these guys being more involved on third down with blitzes. And we are drawing up the defenses to where these guys are getting one-on-ones with running backs on third down. And the running back is being forced to stay in protection. And these two guys are just killing that matchup. So I think what you're seeing, right now is just two guys that got more, added to their plate, and they're playing really well for us. And that's the change that you've seen with us affecting the quarterback. These two linebackers are blitzing their butts off on third down.
So let me ask you about this. You look a year ago, Georgia had some issues defensively last year at times too, but it seemed to be very comfortable playing against Texas. Only 15 points allowed in the game against in October of last year, only 19 points allowed in the SEC championship last December. And so from that line of thought, okay, well, the Texas offense, the Steve Sarkisian offense, is an offense that Georgia is theoretically comfortable defending. But Texas has also had 2 weeks to prepare here, gives what I think a smart coach like Sark a chance to do some things that make Georgia uncomfortable. To me, that's the game within the game. Does Georgia pick up right where it left off? It got after Quinn Ewers a year ago more so than it did almost any other quarterback. It kept Texas out of the end zone almost better than any other good offense it played last season. And what can Sark do to counteract what Georgia had success doing a season ago? That, to me, is probably the game within the game on Saturday.
Yeah, no. And, for all the fans, brace yourself. The defense may start off slow. Okay, the first 15 plays for the offense, they're scripted. They know exactly, what you're in, and it's ran like a well-oiled machine. So, and you're having 2 weeks to, prepare. So you're going to see in those, 2 weeks, Texas have had time to go up back and watch the Tennessee game, go back and watch the Bama game, go back and watch the Ole Miss game. So they are putting a game plan together for those first 2 drives of what did those 3 teams do versus us. They know that we're going to zone blitz, so they're probably going to get the ball out fast just to make sure, Archie Manning, is calmed down. And I think once the defense settles in, you will start to see, in my opinion, some of the similar things you saw Texas struggle with when they played not Ole Miss, but what was the team that Matt Patricia's on?
Ohio State.
Yes. When you have that multiple style defense and on third down, you're just, crowding the line. Archie doesn't do well with that. You saw that against Vandy and you saw that versus Florida. So you got this Coach Smart versus Steve matchup, but I think on third down is where it's going to be the most important down, because if 16 knows what you're in and he has a good, clean pocket, he's a great quarterback. If he doesn't know what you're in pre-snap, he struggles.
Yeah.
So Georgia has to make sure we stop the run and get them in third and long so we can bring in those multiple third down fronts that me and you just, talked about with 5 and 3, so they can give some pressure to Archie Manning. So basically the key in this game on the defensive side of the ball is to make sure that you are confusing number 16 pre-snap, and I think we'll be fine.
I love that. That's a great thing to be watching for on Saturday night as we see this play out. Davin, more of that tomorrow. Can't wait to see you for DawgNation on Tap. Thanks so much for being a part of this here today. This is one of the big ones, and I tell you, for someone like me, I live for this. Give me the big game, give me the high stakes, give me the loud crowd, give me the big platform. It's going to be an awesome day on Saturday. I think you've done a lot to help us get prepared for it, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you, man. This is why you come to Georgia. There's no hype speech needed. Right before the playoffs, great test. Man, I'll see you tomorrow.
I can't wait, Davin. Well said to close it out. Great stuff there from Davin Bellamy. Truly an awesome interview and a great job. And I think that Davin's absolutely right about this, that Kirby says this all the time. He says, this is why you come to Georgia. There is just something about the appetite for participation in a big game. Fans feel it. They want to be at the big game. Players obviously feel it. They want to play in the big game. A big game just feels different. It just does. That's one of the reasons why we do a lot of stuff in the playoff here today. It's one of the reasons why I'll argue so aggressively on behalf of the SEC, almost no matter what. Just give me whatever facts there are, and I'll find a way to argue for the SEC, because this is what the SEC does. I want football to be more of this, and I want it to be less of, sleepy noon start between Indiana and, I don't know, whoever they happen to be playing. I love the intensity week in, week out of the SEC. I am genuinely very proud of it, and I love the fact that Georgia is right in the middle of it, and man, am I ready for Saturday? And I'm also ready to talk to all of you about it tomorrow night with DawgNation on Tap. Now, a couple of things before we go here today. First of all, speaking of DawgNation on Tap, we've told you that the food there that night is courtesy of our friends at Cercheros. Well, guess what? If you've been hearing me say, well, you talk about Cercheros all the time. Let me tell you something. This is an experience you need to have, because I just love this fresh mix. I love the fact that when you go in store there and eat at one of their restaurants, a lot of times we'll be at the Alpharetta location. You go in, and the food that you eat feels like it was prepared for you. There are a lot of other, place you might go, it sort of feels like the food was made 6 months ago and it just happened to be what was there when you got there. Not here. You go through the line at Cercheros. First of all, you got like 25 different toppings to put on the burrito or the bowl or whatever you're doing. And for the veggies and things like that, you can get them grilled up fresh for you. Now, to be honest, I don't do a ton of veggies on my burrito because I'm essentially a 12-year-old boy when it comes to my palate and taste buds. But you may get a lot more than I do. I got my corn grilled. The last time we were there for our event the other day, I got my corn grilled. It was delicious, fantastic. But whatever veggies you want, you can get them grilled up. The point is, they take great care to make sure your food tastes fresh. You can experience that tomorrow at DawgNation on Tap, or for a game day watching party, whether it be at your home or you got a big tailgate in Athens. Hey, listen, the fresh mix of Cercheros would be a great way to enjoy Georgia, Texas on Saturday too, we would say. So make sure you check that out. You can find out more online at Cercheros.com. And I always got to make sure I say this the right way, because me, the Northeast Georgia a native, sometimes a little bit of a Northeast Georgia twang in the way that I say Cercheros. It is Surcheros, Cercheros.com for more on that today. That is Cercheros.com for more on that today. By the way, speaking of big games, we got one on Saturday, and there's one to conclude the season here too. Boy, Tech fans, they're so mad right now. Oh my gosh. Tech fans are just beside themselves because they dropped in the rankings. Miami moved up. Tech didn't even play. It's like this committee doesn't know who Tech is. They've never heard of Haynes King. They don't know anything about Georgia Tech. They are so uninterested in Georgia Tech. But Tech's going to have its opportunities to do something about that. They get to play Pitt. They get to play Georgia. And let me tell you this right now. I can laugh at them. I can make fun of them. The truth is, last couple of years, they've played Georgia pretty close. So much so that they think they're winning against Georgia on Black Friday afternoon. And if I was a Tech fan, I'm sure I'd be saying whatever too. As embarrassing as that'd be, I'm sure I'd be saying whatever. The point is we, all of us, need to make sure that doesn't happen. And the best way for you to do that is to get your tickets to be in the stadium and prevent Tech from having a home game. They literally said, we're going to give our home game to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And Georgia fans need to be there like $100 bill on the ground saying, okay, then we're here to take it. It was going to be your home game. Now it's our home game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Georgia fans are scarfing up these tickets, but there still may be a chance for you to get yours. So go to mercedes-benzstadium.com/events to get your tickets for this big rivalry game today. And honestly, all kidding aside, Tech's had a good season. Tech has put itself in the position for the college football playoff. Tech could win the ACC, which with all of that being the case, how much better would it be then for Georgia to beat them? You don't want to do anything to give the committee any chance to have any sort of, diminished view of you. You want to make sure you keep winning your games. November 28th, it's Black Friday afternoon against Georgia Tech. Get your tickets. Cannot wait to see you there for that one then. All right, as we get ready to wrap up here today, a lot of energy about Georgia, Texas. Man, we are ready for it. This is a fun one. I'm proud of the fact that Georgia beat Texas twice a year ago. We think of this as the continuation of the trilogy. Now, Kirby will tell you, new team, new season. This team didn't beat Texas. I understand why he's saying that, but I was at both those games a year ago. We're going to be there on Saturday. I like the idea of completing the set. Yeah, you ever collect baseball cards? You want to complete the set? We get a chance to complete the set on Saturday in Austin and Atlanta and Athens. That's a pretty good little trio of wins that Georgia could have against Texas. By the way, with that in mind, we'll give you a golden shoe. Our buddy Robin, who's great with the graphics, it gives you a Go Dogs horns down. Get the fireworks going off at Sanford Stadium. Believe you me, they're going to be the pyro is going to be amazing on Saturday. Cannot wait for it. He says, be Sanford loud, hashtag horns down, beat Texas again, at DawgNation Daily. Robin, we are of one accord on this one. Cannot wait for that. But with all of our energy focused on Texas, because I am a multitasker, I still have the ability to take a couple of seconds out of my day to turn my gaze, over to Gainesville, Florida, where those lousy, stinking Gators resolve, and remind them ever so briefly that it's been 1,831 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We always got time for that. We always want to remind them that we've been doing this now for 5 years, and we're going to keep on doing it, and we are just going to keep on reveling in it. They change coaches every other year, but we keep right on doing the same thing, which is beating Florida every single season. Y'all have a great day. We are back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Okay, so I've got a couple things I got to do today. We've also gone really long on comments, so we've got to be a little bit short today, but I'm going to try to be respectful to every one of our comment sections, and then we'll jump out of here after that. G. Grace has determined that Kalen DeBoer was a big game coach. Well, we'll see. We'll see. The opponent they're playing on Saturday got dragged by a year ago. We didn't think it was a big game going into it, but it kept him out of the playoff. So we'll see. You could be right. Obviously, he figured out Georgia a couple times, so got to give him credit for that. Let's see what else. Yeah, I saw there was a Texas fan in here trolling today. It's one of those things like if y'all will just talk amongst yourselves and don't give him oxygen, all of that will go away. That's the thing about like internet stuff. That's why, like a lot of times I'm sure I say plenty of dumb stuff. A lot of times I'll get criticism on the internet for something that I say, but I genuinely don't believe that's real. If you close your eyes, it just goes away. It's kind of like the monster under your bed when you're a kid. You can just decide it doesn't exist and boom, it's just gone. Internet trolls in the YouTube chat, You can just pretend he's not there, and for all intents and purposes, he isn't. It's the way that works. I don't have notifications, for instance, turned on my phone. So if I say something dumb, every now and then I'm sure I do, but if I do, the entire world can be yelling at me. I will never know. I'll never know. I'll never know. You can't make me care about what people on the internet are saying about me. You cannot do that. Oh, Lord, do we have an internet thing? Please don't let that be the case. Or is that me? Maybe that's me. Okay, yes. So, yeah, thankfully, I thought we dropped. That was just my computer came unplugged for a second. So I think we're still here. Wyatt Fielding, are you calling a game Friday night? Yes, I am. We got a good one. We got Sprayberry and Lee County. Very rare playoff road game for Lee County coming up to the Atlanta area. You better believe we jumped on that game. And Sprayberry is obviously fun. Got a Georgia commit, got an Alabama commit. It's a really good team. This is going to be a great game. Christy says Georgia weather is bipolar like Bevo. It is crazy, isn't it, Christy? And I tell you this, man, I am not made for that cold weather. Ooh, boy, am I not made for that. I am not made for that. Christy asked me where I got the hoodie. So this is from a Georgia company that I don't even think exists anymore, unfortunately. What was it called? It was called Tailgate Apparel. And they had a partnership with, and this is like not an ad because I literally don't think you can buy this anymore. They had a partnership with American Eagle, which is the same company that obviously famous. So much like Sydney Sweeney, they made me one of their spokespeople, and they sent me a bunch of clothes. And I'm telling you this right now, every time I wear something from them, I get tons of compliments for it. And I hate to be this way, but it's nice to get a compliment. It's nice to have people say something nice about you. Every time I wear this stuff, people are like, oh, B, that looks great. I have all different kinds of stuff. The famous cardigan that people talk about, that came from the same company. People love that stuff. Apparently not enough because I don't believe they're in business anymore. But people loved that stuff. By the way, Christy also giving you a boo Sprayberry as a Lassiter fan, or Laster grad. Laster and Sprayberry, longtime hated rivals. I knew Christy was fancy. You know, Laster's a very fancy school, very, very sophisticated alumni. You know, well-to-do, erudite. I knew Christy was fancy. I just deep down, I knew she was, and come to find out, that's the truth. Sandy Price, by the way, reminding us, oh, yeah, that's a good point, Sandy. I'm glad you mentioned this. So in the discussion about A&M beating Missouri, now that doesn't count because Missouri had a backup quarterback, as Sandy correctly points out, Penn State was playing a backup quarterback too. It's a very good point. And they fired their coach because I didn't play this clip because at a certain point you've played all the clips you need to play. But there was this whole thing about Vanderbilt being ranked behind Notre Dame. And the committee's trying to tie itself in knots to explain why Vanderbilt's not good when they just beat an interim coaching staff from Auburn. This is what Mack Rhoades said last night on the conference call. And I'm like, don't even go down that road because y'all are falling all over yourself to show love to Indiana. They just beat an interim coaching staff. It's all just made up. It's all just made up. But I'm convinced, and I'll tell you, there's a math nerd type guy, stat guy. His name's Dave. Is it Bartu? Is that his name? I think he's the one that introduced this idea. I think he's the one. I'm growing more and more convinced that he's correct. That what they really look at is the confluence between your strength of schedule and your game control, that they really do value game control, even though they don't say they do. They do value, they really like game control. And the reason why they don't say that is because, remember, if you're old enough to remember this, the old BCS era, do you remember it was controversial for a while when the BCS first started that they were going to consider margin of victory as a part of the BCS formula? The computers were going to center, we're going to factor in margin of victory as if the human polls didn't already do that. But this became very controversial because people were like, well, now there's going to be an incentive to blow teams out, and now there's going to be no more sportsmanship. And so the BCS folks at the time came back and said, okay, well, we're not going to consider margin of victory. And ever since then, it's been almost like a dirty word to talk about how badly one team beats another as a factor in the outcome. You even see this in youth sports too, which is probably a good thing in youth sports. But if you ever play in one of these baseball or softball tournaments, when it comes to tiebreakers, they don't use margin of victory. Typically speaking, they'll use runs allowed because, there's less. I mean, if you have incentive to score a bunch of runs, or if it's a different sport, score a bunch of points, well, you might just do that against a lesser opponent. But theoretically, everyone's always trying to prevent runs. And so therefore, you want to try to prevent as many as you can. There's not quite as much of a stigma around that. And so most of the tiebreakers for youth sports are around points allowed or runs allowed, more so than runs scored or points scored. It's just stigmatized to think about margin of victory. And so therefore, the committee talked about it in 2014 a lot. Haven't talked about it much since then. But I'm convinced, and I believe it was the guy named Dave Bartu, some of y'all may know, who brought this up. I think it was him. And I think this is what he said. I am convinced they care about game control. To the extent that's not even a made-up thing, you can find it on the ESPN FBI tab. I'm convinced they really care about game control. I'm not convinced they should as much as they do, but I'm convinced that's what they care about. All right, let me go to DawgNation.com here for a minute. All right, on DawgNation.com. We'll see how they're doing over here. By the way, UJ Marine says he's got business next week in Austin. This is, to me, something I did not fully consider when our show first began, but has become one of the most consistent refrains that I hear, is that when people either are taken to or happen to live in enemy territory, they really lean on our show to A, keep them company because they live in a tough spot, and B, the game against the team where they live locally matters more than the Super Bowl, more than 10 Super Bowls. And I love that. I've grown to really love that about the audience because Georgia's a big state. Georgia has not among the largest alumni bases, but a largish alumni base. And so you got people spread all over the place. Plus people just care about Georgia football. I have grown to appreciate how many folks lean on our show because they're either in Austin or Gainesville or Tuscaloosa or wherever else in one of these, enemy territory type places. Randy asked again about the high school game. We mentioned this earlier. Sprayberry in Lee County. It's going to be a great game. Really looking forward to it. Really looking forward to it. By the way, Bill Camacho is going to be at the game on Saturday, so it's a big one. It's a big one. Kayla Meyer says, I'm still upset we had our three-peat opportunity stolen from us. We would have been a favorite over that Michigan team, no doubt. The committee's never has an idea of what they're doing. So I'm going to be very honest about something, and hopefully friends can be honest. I was pretty disappointed in some Georgia fans after the 2023 SEC championship game. And listen, I'm not saying you should care. You don't need to care about what I think, but I'm going to tell you, I was pretty disappointed in some Georgia fans after the 2023 SEC championship game because I really felt like, of course, the game didn't go your way and you were disappointed, but on the heels of winning, was it 29, 30 straight games, whatever it was, 2 straight national championships, you lose one game by a field goal. I think that Georgia should have immediately pivoted to very aggressive, we got to be in the playoff. You cannot exclude us in the playoff. And, I talked to some people pretty close to the situation at Georgia that weekend, and they were adamant that no team that came into a weekend number 1 had ever dropped out of the top 4. And they were right to be adamant about that. But it was really hard to get Georgia fans to want to go along with that. And ultimately, it wouldn't have been a winning argument anyway. But sometimes you make the argument, even if it's not a winning argument, you just do. That was not a winning argument, but it was one that probably needed to be made. And I think in retrospect, people now realize, wait a second, as Caleb said, and he may have known at the time, I'm not criticizing Caleb, but in retrospect, people look back and like, wait a second, we did get jobbed in 2023. How come we missed the playoff that year? It was, to me, obvious at the time, and we tried to make the argument, but people didn't want to hear it. Humans are emotional creatures. They're not logical creatures. They're emotional creatures. humans make decisions emotionally and then try to justify them logically. That's how human behavior goes. That is unmissable when you notice it. And the emotion of that moment was people were sad because they lost to Alabama, and so therefore they didn't want to argue for the playoff. But it was a mistake, and it should have been a more forceful argument. Savannah Bryan says they are bringing back the bracelets on Saturday night, but hopefully not the music from All Quiet on the Western Front. Yeah, that song that kept playing on second down over and over again against Alabama was from the remake of All Quiet on the Western Front. It was just a strange choice. And listen, there are a lot of people who work really hard to make game day at Georgia great. And I really try not to, everybody's got an opinion and, just try not to pile on when it comes to stuff like this. But to me, I do think sometimes we make this harder than it needs to be. I really do. When I go on the road, and I go everywhere, let me tell you what always makes life harder on my favorite team. It's on second, third, fourth down, when it's the really pulsating doom, 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 when it's some sort of song that's got the really pulsating bass, rhythmic, up-tempo, doom, doom, doom. When you've got that paired with the loud crowd, you can't hear yourself think. Auburn does that very well. Tennessee does that very well. South Carolina does that very well. There are a lot of programs who do it very well because they don't overthink it. They just give you, and to me, it's always, and everybody's got different musical tastes. I don't have any preference on this other than whatever gets the crowd the loudest. I'll play anything as long as it gets the crowd the loudest. To my observations, the music that makes the crowd loud is the up-tempo, I don't even know if you call it like electronic or EDM or like whatever like the genre is, but it's club music sort of in a way. No words, just pulsating bass with a little bit of a techno, I guess melody if you want to call it that. That is what works. And it works everywhere it's tried. It's just loud. Because think about like the teenager that lives in your neighborhood. He's driving through the neighborhood. He's got his stereo turned up way too loud, noise pollution. And from like a mile away, you can hear that dum, dum, like bass just travels, right? And so something with a pulsating rhythmic bass is just what you need to do. It needs to be up tempo. And I love the Redcoats. I love the Redcoats, but I think you need to play it on third down too. I do. I just don't think that. I think you need to play it on third down too. And I love the Redcoats, but if you want the stadium to be as loud as it can, you need the kind of music I'm describing, and you need it on second, third, and fourth down. And that is my opinion. Garrison Tucker, going back to 2023, says Nick Saban would have had a conniption. That's how you say that. A conniption fit, as my family used to say, if he didn't get in. And he had the committee by the string. He said that's why UGA didn't get in. They were scared of Saban. Well, he beat Georgia. I don't mind. I would have argued for Georgia to get in over Alabama because Nick Saban would have easily done the same thing. But it seems like the argument maybe wasn't so much with Alabama because Bama beat Georgia. The argument may have been better with somebody else. Maybe it was against Texas. Maybe it was against Michigan. It doesn't have to be in over Alabama, although it could have been that too. Maybe it's Washington. We said before, this is the argument we made at the time, and people thought I was joking, but I was being serious, and it doesn't matter now. But Washington made the playoff because they were the conference champions. But what I said at the time was, why should I care about their conference championship if they don't care enough about that conference to stay in the conference? This was the final year of the Pac-12. So, I'm supposed to respect the Washington Conference Championship for a conference that essentially doesn't exist anymore, or the Texas Conference title. They're also leaving the Big 12. I'm supposed to respect these conference titles when the schools that won them are leaving the conferences? No, thank you. No, thank you on that. All right, let me go to Facebook. We got to We'll have Go With The Flow later on today. Kaylee's going to host Go With The Flow. I'm just going to be on this show. I've got to be remote. I've got a couple of family things going on today, so I'm going to be remote for that, but I'll still be on. All right, on Facebook. Philip Wells says he played chess matches in the team debates while people whispered defense. Yeah, there you go. By the way, Maurice Carter's coming tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you, Maurice. I'm glad you're going to be there. Jim Blair checking in. He's excited about Friday night between Colquitt and Mill Creek. It's going to be a great game. Jacob Alexander talking about the 10s and 12s pumping in the back. Yeah. You know that. Like every neighborhood's got the one kid who's just got the stereo that's way too loud. Let's see what else. Isha Murphy says, since I got out of the Army and stayed here in Texas, I can't stand any Texas team except the Spurs. And now that we have Texas in the conference, I'm already sick of the Longhorns fans. Yeah, listen, it did not take me very long to decide I don't like Texas very much. You're right about that, Isha. And it's funny, the A&M fans, we've heard from so many of them who are like, we told you. And they were right. Every single one of them are right. Every single one of them are right. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming also wants that hat trick for Saturday. I'm looking forward to that too. Kent Holcomb says songs with too much loud bass drive me crazy while sitting in my living room watching TV. Yeah, I mean, if it's loud enough, it'll shake the windows. In fact, if it's loud enough, it'll shake the windows in the car that's playing it, which is never a great sound. The sonic experts will tell you that lower register stuff just travels longer. It's why now, have you noticed this, that the emergency vehicles, instead of having like the wailing siren, have like it's a much lower register noise. I think it just travels more. It's easier to hear, I believe. Joseph Kennedy says, make it so loud those Texas fans want to leave after the one quarter. I love that. I love that for sure. And Philip Wells, who's much cooler than I am, has confirmed that would be considered EDM. So there you go. Let's see what else. Lisa Hamilton shouting out the Roswell Hornets. As she said, they beat Gainesville and Milton back-to-back weeks too, which is kind of amazing. Really amazing performance by them. And we did the Roswell Milton game on television. It was great. Oh, her son-in-law is the head coach. Jonathan Thompson doing a great job. Ironically, Coach Thompson was also at Lee County last year, now head coach at Roswell. That's her son-in-law. Lisa, that's awesome. He's a great coach, doing a great job. Thank you for checking in today. John Paul Williams wants me to do the beatbox over the intercom on third down. Yeah, there you go. There you go. But yeah, give me something pulsating, rhythmic. And honestly, I think you got to have it all downs. Like I said, I love the Redcoats. I love the Redcoats. But if you want the atmosphere to be as good as it can be, you got to have the music on all downs. And like to go back to the lights and the LED thing. Once again, everybody's got an opinion. I totally respect that. I think the mistake that got made there is they chose a song that would work with the lights, but the lights don't make the stadium louder. I'm happy to have the lights. It's not a bad thing. It's the same thing, though, with, like, say, the drone show. You know, Texas got a drone show. And people are like, well, Georgia needs a drone show. I think it'd be cool to see a drone show. Maybe they'll do drones on Saturday. If they did, it'd be cool. I'm not anti-drone show, but drones don't make noise. I want stuff that makes the stadium loud. And good sound system playing pulsating music matched to the crowd that's also building to a crescendo, that makes the stadium louder. So I'm not anti-LED lights. I think it's fun to have them. But that doesn't make noise. I want stuff that makes the crowd make noise. And good, loud music, I think, encourages the crowd to get louder. All right. What else before we go? Marshall Fleming was at Manning's in New Orleans. That is a good spot. You know, we're not fans of the Mannings this week, but the Mannings there in New Orleans is a good spot. Back in 2018, we did a really big DawgNation event there. One of the biggest events we've ever done. It was weird. In New Orleans before the Georgia LSU game in Baton Rouge, and Georgia got blasted in that game. But honestly, that weekend in New Orleans was a fun weekend. Fun weekend. All right. Anything else? All right. Before we go, Matt Griffith says, let me tell you all, the Texas fans are starting to talk big over here, he says. Can't wait to introduce them to their first real SEC experience. Only took them about 2 years. Yeah, they haven't had the real big road games yet, have they? Now, they've made them into losable affairs, but that's a really good point. They really haven't had the big road games yet. That's a really good point, Matt. Myo Frost says the DJ should use Goldberg's anthem. I don't think that's a bad idea. I don't. That's a pretty good idea. All right. Mike Brown says, did I get the article he sent me on Facebook? Mike, I have to apologize. I am not really active on Facebook. I do it for the show, but I don't really do it. But I will try to go find it. But I am not the most active person on Facebook, so I do apologize for that. And if you've ever tried to message me on Facebook before, I'm sorry. I just am not a big Facebook user. I do apologize for that. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. We'll have Go with the Flow presented by RS Andrews later on today. I'll be on. Kaylee going to host. I got to do a couple of family things today, so she's going to help out with that. And we'll look forward to seeing you there for that. By the way, cold right now. Let RS Andrews get your heating system tuned up. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Also, thanks for being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We hope you'll come back and see us again tomorrow.